much.
Spending some of your snowy Tuesday with us. This is the public webinar for the first ever regional trail strategy that has been developed for the Tahoe Basin. My name is Alyssa Bettinger. I'm a senior planner with TRPA, and joining me are a few other partners as panelists, and I'll introduce them in a few minutes. Just some quick guidelines before we get into it. Everyone is muted, so only the panelists can speak and turn on their camera. If you would like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom bar and leave your question in that box. We'll leave some time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. And last, we are recording this session, and the slides will be shared on our website in a few days. So if you do know anyone who's interested in learning more about the regional trail strategy, feel free to share our website with them. Here's a quick agenda of the evening's webinar. We'll do some introductions before talking about why there is a need for a regional trail strategy in the basin and the process that we use to develop it. And last, we'll talk about some of the projects that we feel very excited about with this strategy. And then we have quite a bit of time at the end where we'll try to answer your questions as best we can. Before I introduce the panelists, we wanted to hear a bit about who is in the virtual room today. So if you could please answer the poll on your screen, which of the following best describes you, either you're a full-time resident, seasonal resident, a visitor to the basin, or a commuter, meaning you work in the basin and commute.
All right, maybe we'll give it 10 more seconds. That was a little ambitious. We're going to do 5. All right, I'm going to end the poll here so everyone can see.
Awesome. Looks like we have quite a few full-time residents and seasonal residents. Awesome to see your interest. Great. And then one more, are you an active trail user? Yes or no?
All right, we'll do 5 more seconds. And ending the poll and sharing results.
Perfect. Cool. Looks like a lot of you, most of you are active trail users. For those who aren't, maybe the trail upgrades will inspire you to get out there. All right, so moving on. Again, I'm Alyssa with the TRPA, and I will pass it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kira Smith, also with TRPA.
Hi, I'm Morgan Steele. I'm the Executive Director with the Tahoe Regional Trails Association.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Waldman, Communications and Program Director for the Tahoe Fund.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jacob Quinn. I'm an engineering technician with the Forest Service Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit.
Good evening, everybody. Andrew Bray, or Drew, with Tahoe Area Mountain Bike Association.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Kabor with the Forest Service.
And I realized I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. Victoria Ortiz, Community Engagement Manager with TRPA.
So next up, I will pass this over to Caroline with the Tahoe Fund to talk about why we need a regional trail strategy.
Yeah, hello again, everyone. So like I said before, I'm with the Tahoe Fund, and just to give you a little bit of background on our organization, we fund different environmental improvement projects throughout the Tahoe Basin. And one of our primary goals is to support sustainable outdoor recreation that helps to improve the quality of experience and expand access for more user groups, all while minimizing impacts on some of Tahoe's natural resources. And just for context, we got started back in 2010, and since then have funded over 25 different trail projects and given those projects more than 1.8 million philanthropic dollars. And so funding for these projects typically comes to us. They come as independent requests from some of our different trail partners, some of whom you've met on this webinar, like the Tahoe Regional Trails Association, TAMBA, the Forest Service, state parks. And so it becomes very easy for us to fund some of those shiny new trails that you hear about. But we really want to be sure that we're putting our donor dollars behind projects that are a priority for the whole basin. And that was really a major driver of pulling together this steering committee to create this new basin-wide trails strategy. With this strategy in place, it really helps us take a regional perspective when looking at those different funding requests. And that just makes it a lot easier for us to channel some of those donor dollars into new trail projects or trail maintenance project, trail work projects that have already been established as a priority, by this whole steering committee, by the groups that are doing the work on the ground. So for us, we really just believe this is going to have a huge impact on creating this more sustainable and accessible trail network in Tahoe. And with that, I'll turn it over to Morgan, actually, at the Rim Trail Association, to talk a little bit about why this strategy is important from her perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for the funding too. It's awesome. We really appreciate it. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, the Tahoe Rim Trail Association has been around since 1981, actually, and we maintain about 200 miles of trail in the Tahoe region. That loop that goes around the basin and all those connector trails that link into that. And one of the things that we've really found as we've evolved as an organization is we need to look beyond just the 18 to 24 inches of tread. We do a huge amount of maintenance and trail construction on those miles, but there's also a need to look at visitor use, a lot of monitoring around there. There's also, major infrastructure issues that we're noticing that need to be addressed so that we can accommodate the growing users on the trail. And as Carolyn mentioned, just make sure that the recreational opportunities that we are providing are sustainable. And we're making sure that that next generation that might come up that wants to enjoy the Tahoe Rim Trail can have the same experience that we're having today, be able to enjoy the same natural resources. So really with the trail strategy, the big goal for us is to be able to take some of those larger scale projects and really be able to engage our stakeholders around the basin with some of those ideas and prioritize things and really bring some more attention to things like highway crossings for users and wildlife, and looking at bathrooms and trailheads and public transit. And those are just things that are huge, big, challenging issues. And really by putting them into a larger strategy document with all of our partners, we really feel like we'll be able to move some of those things forward and really make an impact in the coming years. So we're really excited to see this come to fruition, and really appreciate all the impact or input the community has provided to this document so far.
I'm going to pass it to Mike Gabor with the Forest Service to talk about the environmental analysis and kind of what this document is and what it isn't. Mike, take it away.
Lisa, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay. I was having some computer difficulties. I've been trying to get on for about 30 minutes now, and I just got on like 10 seconds ago. So you might have seen me earlier, but I'm sort of flashing it out. Anyway, so This is Mike Bohr. I work for the Forest Service here at Lake Tahoe, and we're conducting an environmental analysis for a subset of our trails around the basin. We haven't performed or completed an entire analysis of the basin yet to date. We've done various portions. We call them trail sheds. They were different areas, and now we're looking at all of them together. And why we were excited about this particular process with TRPA and our partners is because it stitches together all the different agencies, the connectivity, and helps us get more of a public input from like an independent party on what we're doing with trails, and helps us keep kind of track of where the different interests are and where some of the concerns. So in our environmental analysis, we've been working on that for a few years now. We're anticipating getting it out this year. Kind of have a little bit of staffing stuff that we're working through, but we've been getting close to getting our draft document released for everybody to review. There's some pretty interesting stuff in there. Many folks saw our scoping document release. We received over 500 comments on that particular document. This is the follow through to that, addressing those particular comments and hoping to get this out there as a next step in looking at our trails basin-wide. We heard a lot of comments on various areas and tried to respond as best we could to all of those comments. So I'm looking forward to seeing if we hit the mark on some of that, and probably be looking at that sooner than later this year. I think that's all that I have, Alyssa, for right now.
An environmental review process with this strategy document. And so all of the projects that are included in this document will either need to go through the appropriate environmental review or are in the process of going through the appropriate environmental review. Like Mike mentioned, a lot of the projects on Forest Service lands that are included in this strategy are part of the basin-wide trails analysis that is in progress right now. And there, with every environmental analysis through the Forest Service or state parks, there is a separate public comment process for that. So just because a trail project is included in this document doesn't mean that this is the only opportunity to comment on that project. All right, and next I will pass it over to Kira.
All right, thanks, Alyssa and Mike. So the basin-wide trails analysis is a related but separate project from the Tahoe Regional Trails Strategy. And we wanted to talk about the basin-wide trails analysis a little bit, but really we're here tonight to talk about the trail strategy and focus on that. So let's dive into the actual trail strategy and talk about what exactly is included. So at the core, the draft trail strategy is a vision plan looking out 15 years with the goal of creating a quality and connected, accessible trail network. The trail strategy identifies projects, including existing trails that require maintenance or should be decommissioned, a list of proposed new trail connections, a list of proposed new trailheads, and a list of trailhead improvements. This planning effort also included developing a mapped inventory of the existing trails and trailheads in the region, identifying funding sources and strategies to implement the priority project list, and basin-wide signage recommendations to improve the quality of information and ensure regional consistency. Next slide. The draft strategy also includes a section on public outreach and data collection. So when we first kicked off this planning process, we did a lot of public and stakeholder outreach to both determine the regional needs and to identify barriers to accessing trails and specific locations to focus improvements on. So you'll see some of the public survey results and analysis included in chapter 3 of this strategy. Next slide. So we used that public and stakeholder input we collected to help inform the goals of the regional trail strategy. Our strategy goals listed here reflect what the community wants to see out of this strategy, and all of the priority trail projects were evaluated against these goals to ensure that the trail network at Tahoe continues to be environmentally sustainable, enjoyable, connected, equitable, and that the proposed projects are feasible to build and maintain in the long term. So you'll see throughout the draft document, these goals come up frequently because everything that's proposed in this document was evaluated with these goals in mind. Next slide. So once we had established the goals for the strategy, we worked for several months to develop a set of criteria to evaluate each of the trail projects against the goals. And since this strategy is more of a vision document, our planning team started out with a really robust vision for the trail network. And through an extensive vetting process, we narrowed our priority project list down from just over about 80 potential trail projects to the 32 projects that are included in the draft document. And this final set of projects, we feel really reflects what the community wants and what our partners and land managers feel is realistic over the next 15 years. So that's it for my section. I'm going to pass it back to Alyssa.
In addition to the specific priority projects that are listed in the strategy, based on public feedback that we've received throughout the process, the steering committee developed a set of just more general policy recommendations for trail and trailhead projects that should be implemented along with the strategy. And I'll go over these just real quick in the next couple slides. So the first general recommendation is that we should be really focusing on maintaining what already exists before building any new trails. And so the document does include quite a bit of maintenance in addition to any new projects. The second is communicating with proprietary trail websites. So we found through our public survey that a lot of people get their information and make decisions on where they want to recreate based on based on websites like All Trails and Trail Forks, etc. And so we really need to be making an effort to make sure those information sources are up to date. The next recommendation is where feasible, any new trails should incorporate accessibility within the first mile to kind of expand the opportunities that we are providing for recreation for people with physical disabilities. And in the same vein, there are a lot of barriers that exist today at trailheads that prevent people in wheelchairs from actually getting to the trail. And so we would like to make a focus on where we can improve access in those regards, and also making sure that we're dedicating parking spaces to people with disabilities just to make sure that they do have access. And then in locations with high visitation or where we're adding any new parking, we should really be considering where paid parking and reservation systems could fit in with the strategy. This obviously goes hand in hand with providing transit access to high visitation locations, which is a focus of a lot of our other work at TRPA. We would like to provide priority access to trails for Indigenous peoples. This could be through showing their tribal ID when they visit a high visitation location. Prioritizing safe crossing infrastructure when trails are crossing major highways in the basin. And then improving wayfinding and signage from trail or for trailheads that are accessible from major highways or neighborhoods. We want to make sure that we're not just focusing on wayfinding within the trail network itself, but outside, helping people get to those locations where they can access trails. And just to quickly touch on implementation before we get into the project spotlights. The strategy in chapter 4 includes quite a bit of information on each priority project. So it includes who the land manager is, as well as the project proponent. And in some cases, the project proponent is the same as the land manager. In other cases, it's the trail stewardship organization that is actually going to help build the trail on, for example, the Forest Service land. And then it also includes a timeline for implementation. So projects fall into 2 different buckets, the 0 to 5 year timeline and the 5 to 15 year timeline. This was based on how many details have already been developed for each project, how far along they are in the process, and working with the land managers to determine how feasible they are and when they would actually be implemented. And then another important note is the implementation of these projects into the Environmental Improvement Program, also known as the EIP. So all of these projects will be included in the EIP tracker, which is a public resource. And it's an effort, to be transparent to the public about where the project is in terms of permitting and construction, as well as funding. It's a great way for us to determine which projects still need to be funded. And so again, these projects will be included in the EIP, and the group that was highlighted in the first few slides, that will become an EIP working group. So we'll kind of reevaluate the strategy on an annual basis and determine which projects are moving along, which need funding, and if any other projects need to be added to the strategy. So the strategy includes recommendations for maintenance and decommissioning of trails, as I mentioned before. The routine maintenance of projects are not included in this document because it's pretty hard to know what trails are going to need what, a long time before. And so the strategy does focus on, larger maintenance projects. An example of this is the Bayview Trail. It is a heavily used trail that goes into the Desolation Wilderness, and it's in need of reconstruction in certain areas, revegetation, and addressing the drainage issues that exist. And then we also do have some recommendations for trails that should be decommissioned in the strategy. We decommission trails for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they weren't official trails to begin with. Sometimes they're unsustainably built and causing erosion issues or drainage issues. Or other times there's conflicts with cultural or wildlife resources. And so an example of a trail that we are proposing or that we're recommending be decommissioned in this strategy is the Cave Rock Trail due to cultural and wildlife resources that exist there. And next I will pass it over to Morgan.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, we have a couple projects that are included in the document that we wanted to highlight for folks on the call tonight. One of them is constructing a new trailhead at Brockway Summit up off of Highway 267. Those of you that are familiar with the area will probably know the very obvious need for this trailhead. Right now, there's pretty limited parking in this area, and the trailhead is a little further down the road from the summit. So you get a lot of folks parking along the highway, and it's just becoming a real safety concern. And I know for the Tahoe Rim Trail Association, it's not the world-class experience that we want to provide for our users. So we're very enthusiastically supporting this project to be able to construct a trailhead, hopefully, much higher up at the summit, so cars will have better sight lines and users will have better sight lines as they're trying to cross roads, and be able to provide better parking, hopefully maybe bathrooms, some water, all the infrastructure that users are expecting when they come to a trailhead at in the Tahoe Rim Trail and for the Tahoe Rim Trail or in the Tahoe Basin. So that's an exciting project to see move forward. And this one is actually currently in the basin-wide trails analysis. So that's where you're seeing this prioritize as something hopefully happening a little earlier versus some of the longer term projects that we are still looking at. And the next one, if you want to advance this slide, Alyssa, is one of those long-term projects, and you'll see that's kind of why it has this conceptual label to it. So this is a project near Highway 50 near Echo Lakes. Again, a very heavily used section of the Tahoe Rim Trail, and our organization and our partners have really identified this area as a key location for review. So as it's a conceptual project, we don't really know the answer here, but our organization, our stakeholders that we work with, our partners have really identified that we need to look at this whole area from the crossing of Highway 50 all the way north to the junction with Desolation Wilderness and probably even beyond, to really figure out how we're going to accommodate the users in this area. What are appropriate solutions? How do we maintain the current trail access that we have? How do we get users in that area from where they might be parking to the trailhead in a safe way? So there's a lot of different pieces to consider here. Additionally, because there is so much use in this area, looking at if there's options that are sustainable that we could loop around some of the more heavily used sections of this area of the trail, specifically around Echo Lakes there. So lots of kind of to be determined in this area, but I think that's really, again, one of the really positives about this strategy document is that we can really look and as a basin-wide group of stakeholders, figure out what the solution is for these areas to really accommodate a growing number of users, and also maintain in some of these more sensitive areas the wilderness character of the trails in this area, and make sure we're not losing any of those really special characteristics of the trail here. So with that, I will pass it on to the next project.
Thanks, Morgan. We wanted to highlight a few of the actions that are proposed in the current basin-wide trail project that Mike introduced a few moments ago. The Forest Service has known and has heard comments for years about a lack of trail connectivity along the west shore of Lake Tahoe. There are trails in those areas. Most of them go either through Desolation Wilderness or connect from neighborhoods on a user-created system. So part of the intent of the basin-wide trail project was to consider those connections. Where do we have gaps? Where do we need to fill those gaps? And which of the trails that are existing kind of make sense, but might need a little bit of a reroute or a larger scale effort to make the connectivity there. So this project is currently proposed from Emerald Bay up to Meeks area. There are a couple other actions shown on this map, which is like the Meeks Wigs Trail, for example, that's currently under construction. So these connections we feel are quite important for the West Shore. They also serve the long-term goal that the Forest Service and other partners have of creating shared use single track around the lake. So by shared use, I mean available to hikers, equestrians, mountain bikes, and in some cases open to e-bikes or perhaps motorized use where appropriate. I wanted to also invite Drew Bray from Tahoe Area Mountain Biking Association to comment. They've been a key partner in some of these West Shore Trail actions, as well as just a key partner in maintenance and construction all around the Lake Tahoe Basin.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, TAMBA has been working in partnership with the Forest Service to provide a lot of volunteer, and now with support, we're able to provide paid trail crew support to ongoing trail maintenance, repairs, construction, all the way around the Lake Tahoe Basin. We're excited to be able to help build some of the trail connectivity through the west shore of Lake Tahoe. There's some beautiful areas in there. There are existing trail beds and alignments, and together with Forest Service oversight, we're able to get some of those opened up and accessible and provide more opportunities for people to recreate all through the west shore and all around the basin. And just want to reinforce too that TAMBA supports multi-user trails everywhere that we go. We invite all different sorts of folks to come along and volunteer. That helps build trail stewardship and ownership. And also with our education and advocacy, we work real hard to make sure that there's a good communication out there for being a good trail user to all different folks that are out there on these trails. So We're excited to be part of this. This is an amazing project to be part of, and the envy of more than a few different areas that we can get so many agencies and so many partners to come to the table, share plans for the future, invite the public to be part of it, and herald some new opportunities for a much improved recreation experience at the lake. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Drew. I think we'll pass it on to Mike.
Okay, so one of the projects that we've heard about is the High Meadows Trailhead. Access some popular trails up there, Gold Creek, High Meadows. And this particular trailhead, the lower part of it's pretty informal. The upper part of it's also pretty informal. And we're looking at some opportunities to do a little bit more BMPing of the parking, a little more defined parking, trying to create some more opportunity for people to park there versus in the neighborhood, some signage. So I've been hearing quite a bit about additional access up there. There's interest in the winter access as well. And we have to be mindful in the winter about years like we have right now, where we have a whole lot of agency resources that are tied up in just trying to keep up with the storms that are occurring, and versus putting those out there to open up recreation areas. So this is why we look for partners, such as the Backcountry Alliance and some other folks that are interested in providing winter access to help us with providing those opportunities to the public. That creates a great public-private partnership to provide those recreation opportunities. So we'll be taking a look at that for that particular location. That's one example of one of the neighborhood areas we're looking at. We do take great consideration when looking at these particular trailheads about not necessarily expanding those or encouraging those, because it does bring a lot of people through a neighborhood. So we have to be pretty mindful about getting the neighborhood involved with any of those projects that we're proposing. So I think you can take it to the next one.
Project Spotlight and our presentation. We're happy to take questions now. So if you haven't already submitted your questions, please do so. I do want to note that we have our project website is tahoetrailsplan.org. We have a full interactive web map of all of the projects that are included in the strategy. So not just the ones that you saw tonight, but all 35 of them are included on that web map. So feel free to take a look. You can also submit any input to tahoetrailsplan@trpa.gov. You can just email us with your comment. I do want to note that this is a little bit different than an environmental document. So this is, we're not going through a NEPA process with this specific regional trails strategy. And so there is no formal public comment period, but we are collecting input as we have done throughout this entire planning process. And we will make adjustments to the strategy as we feel is needed. And if there are specific comments about or comments about specific trail projects or trailhead projects, we will forward those to the appropriate land manager that would be going through the environmental process, the environmental review process for those. We do have a deadline to submit public input. That's March 31st. So be sure to email us within the next about a week and a half to get those in. And I will turn it over to V to facilitate the Q&A.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. And now it's time for participants to ask their questions. We've already had quite a few come in during the presentation, so we'll start with some of those. But just for everyone else, if you do have a question, just go ahead and pop it in the Q&A, and we will do our best to either answer it live or have some of our panelists answer it by typing in an answer. So we're going to start with a question about how public transit agencies have been involved in the trail strategy so far. Who would like to take that one?
I can answer that one. So the trail strategy as a vision document has been primarily focused on identifying what we want the trail network to look like in the next 15 years with our partners, which included the Tahoe Area Mountain Biking Association, Tahoe Rim Trail Association, TRPA, the Tahoe Fund, the Forest Service, the California Tahoe Conservancy, Achieve Tahoe, and the Washoe Tribe. And I think that was everybody, but jump in if I miss somebody. So we were really focused on having these discussions with our land managers and trail stewardship organizations. We will be engaged with the transit agencies as we move further along into the planning process, and go through environmental reviews for some of these projects and gather more public input. But throughout this process, we did not really engage with public transit agencies very closely.
Thank you, Kira. Next question is, who initiated this Tahoe Regional Trails plan? And Caroline, I know you mentioned that in the beginning, but maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I've talked about already, this was a sort of major priority for us at the Tahoe Fund from a funding perspective. Again, just to make it a little easier for us to decide which projects were priorities, not just for us at the Tahoe Fund, but across some of those land manager, trail organizations, everyone that you've been hearing from on this call. So this group got together, I believe it's been 2 years, although I can probably be corrected on that, to bring this strategy together. So it's been a long process that's involved a lot of public engagement, but that's just a little bit about how it came to be. And I'd welcome any other members of the steering committee who have been at this longer than I have to jump in and share any of that history.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'll add a little bit to that. So in the beginning of this, when we were talking with the Tahoe Fund about funding various projects, we had been getting together as partners to discuss kind of priority of the projects for each year's funded projects and projects that had already gone through environmental analysis. And we wanted to get a more broad picture amongst all the partners in the area and stakeholders of what are people interested in, because sometimes trails are being proposed and they're through an environmentally sensitive area, and they're not going to be able to make it through and selected for construction. So I think that our interest was not only getting everybody together to get a broader picture of what we're doing on trails, but also to look at being able to fund trails that we don't want to have there and being able to decommission them, because we're getting a lot of user created trails. And by having a robust discussion and public input, we could say, all right, these particular trails in these areas have some concerns and we wouldn't be pursuing those. So let's go ahead and fund decommissioning versus funding an analysis to add the trail. Hope that added some clarification.
Thank you. Yeah, and if anyone does have follow-up questions, again, feel free to throw those in the Q&A as well. The next question is the goal to document all of the trails in the basin that are planned for implementation in the next 15 years? So if someone could maybe speak to that and reinforce again how it connects to the overall environmental improvement program, that could be helpful.
So yeah, that is kind of the goal. We definitely wanted to take a regional perspective and tie it back to the goals that we developed with, as part of the strategy. And so there are a lot of trails that could potentially happen in the next 15 years. A lot more than what is included in the strategy. I think there were 85 total that we started with, and then boiled that down to about 35. And a lot of a big reason why we were able to take it from 85 to 35 was because we were really looking at it from a regional perspective of what would benefit the region the most, which trail projects would benefit the region the most. And so based on the outcome of that, we again are putting those projects into the environmental improvement program, where we can, all partners can kind of collaborate on actually bringing those projects to fruition through funding and resources. And it's also just a way to be transparent to the public. So I think that answers it, but if it doesn't, anyone else feel free to chime in.
Thanks, Alyssa. Okay, this next question is about what happens with the comments that are being submitted by March 31st. Can someone explain how that might update anything or how those comments will be incorporated?
Yeah, I can take this one too. So we've received quite a few comments. It really depends on the nature of the comment. So if the comment is on a specific project, we will forward those to the land manager. So a lot of the comments will likely go to the Forest Service because they have the most land in the basin, and they will incorporate those into the work that they do. If the comment is, more generally about the wayfinding aspect of the plan or the funding aspect of the plan, we will make adjustments as we see fit. And we are planning to produce a final draft. So what is on our website right now is the public draft right now. And that is, again, just a draft. And so we'll have a final version of the document in mid-April. And that document will incorporate any changes that we make based on the comments that we've received.
Thanks, Alyssa. There's a few questions in here about how the public is going to be able to comment and get involved in future trails. So can someone speak to how every trail will still require more environmental analysis and public comment period?
I can start on that one because I've been trying to answer that same thing in several of these questions. As I mentioned in some of these responses, I'm trying to think of any of the projects listed. And granted, it's a long document, so I can't say this for sure, but I'm aside from some of those maintenance projects, all of these projects are still going to have to go through the normal environmental review process. So that means it will go through having a public comment process, going through all that NEPA work. So there will be multiple occasions to be able to provide input as these projects come through that system. So for some of the projects that are more of our upcoming projects that are in the basin-wide trails analysis that a few of my colleagues have mentioned, those projects have gone to that public comment process already. They'll be, moving through that a little sooner. These other projects, again, they're still in the works. A lot of them don't even have a route on a map, a GIS or a GPS track. None of that work is even done. They're still conceptual. So as they move forward, as we do the research, as we do the on the ground implementation, we'll be soliciting input from that as needed. And then it will definitely have that opportunity to have the formal public comment process, which is much different, as we've talked about a little bit, what we will do with the comments here, much different than this process where, we're still just looking at a vision here. We want to get input and see what people's thoughts are. Those comments will go to land managers and have that formal review process. So I just wanted to add that because I know I've been saying that in a lot of these comments, I'm sure, or maybe there's other comments from some of my other colleagues.
One of the things I'll add, Morgan, is part of the objective of this particular process that we're going through now is to increase transparency and awareness of what we're doing. The more public outreach we can have, the more engagement we can have, the more interaction, the better we can get a set of trails up here at Lake Tahoe that the community is interested in and supportive of. And there's always going to be some debate around trails. It's just the nature of the way projects work up at Lake Tahoe. There's people that are interested in having those and there's people that are not. But we are, as Morgan said, going through environmental process for every single project. Anything that's new gets to go through the environmental analysis, sometimes an EIS, depending on the scope and scale of the impacts. Most of them are through an EA process versus an EIS. And some of that work is included in the current EA that we're going to be putting on the street from the U.S. Forest Service, which is a separate effort from this particular project. But we were happy that they were both occurring at the same time, so we can get additional targeted work with getting out to the public for comment on various trails. So getting people aware of the process that we're going to be doing as well. So I think, we're excited to see that this additional input and opportunity for people to comment. But you can rest assured you will have an opportunity to comment through an environmental analysis, which is an official public comment, versus this project, which is more for awareness on those particular trails that you're concerned about.
Thank you both. Yeah, that was good to emphasize. We saw a lot of questions on there. And some on specific projects. So again, a reminder, if you have any questions on specific projects, feel free to email Tahoe Trails Plan at trpa.gov, and we can make sure to connect you up with someone to go deeper dive into that particular project. I'm going to keep some of these questions a little more broad on the overall trail strategy. And there's one in here about enforcement, about how some new trails, or in general, if there's anything in the strategy about how these trails, old and new, will be patrolled to encourage positive behavior on the trails.
I can speak to that pretty broadly. I think that that's one of the elements where this strategy has been needed for a while. So, for myself, when I'm out preparing to use a trail, I usually leave from my house. And in getting to the U.S. Forest Service trail system, I will go on a county trail, I'll go on a city trail, I'll go on a U.S. Forest Service trail. I'll cross a whole bunch of jurisdictions to do that. Right now, the regulations of allowed uses and the signage is pretty inconsistent between all those different agencies and organizations. By having a strategy, there's an entire section in there about signage and consistency in messaging and attempting to become consistent with regulation of allowed uses so that it's clear where certain types of uses are allowed and not. So that education piece alone, I think, is a really key part of being successful in managing trails and who's on them, whether that's an allowed use or not. Of course, there has to be an enforcement piece with that. We're lacking that right now, I'll just be frank. The Forest Service has responsibility over federal land and federal trails. We do our best to patrol those trails, to enforce those regulations. We don't have all the resources we need to be as successful as we want to be with that. The question of building more trails before we're fully successful at that management piece, I do understand that. And I think that by having clear maps that cross jurisdictional boundaries with allowed uses and clear signage, that'll actually give us the right foundation on which then we can start to do patrol and enforcement throughout the basin.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate that answer. All right, this next question is about ensuring that additional infrastructure such as trash and sanitation are also being addressed. Can anyone speak to some of that additional infrastructure and some of the needs?
I can talk a little bit about how we thought about that in this strategy. So that's a great question. It was definitely something that we thought about early on and often throughout this planning process. When we initially released our public survey about a year and a half ago at this point, one of the questions that we asked was, what amenities do you value the most at trailheads? And we had respondents indicate what types of amenities, like additional signage, better trash cans, bathrooms, more parking, all of those types of amenities. And that was definitely a major consideration when we were evaluating which trailheads required improvements. So we looked at both where people are accessing trails the most, so which trailheads are the most popular in the basin. And then we had an inventory of the existing amenities at each of those trailheads. And we were able to identify what was needed, what sorts of infrastructure improvements would be needed at those trailheads. And so you'll see included in chapter 4 in the strategy, a list of some of those trailhead improvements and recommendations for some of those infrastructure improvements and amenity additions at some of those really high use trailheads.
Thank you, Kira. This next question is about funding. And this person points out that there is money allocated for construction. And they're wondering if there's any projected budget for personnel for monitoring, trail use or repair, cleanup, things like that.
I can take that one. I think this is a really important conversation that I know is happening a lot in the basin, and we're very thankful that our partners, especially folks like Tahoe Fund, have really identified that maintenance is an important piece to fund, because the person who wrote this question is definitely right. It is much easier to raise funds for shiny new projects than it is to maintain existing infrastructure. But I really think that's where, you know, my organization is the Tahoe Rim Trail Association, TAMBA, and the other, you know, trail stewardship groups really play a huge role in that. I would say 90% of what we're doing is maintaining our current infrastructure and really making sure that the trails that we do have are sustainable and we're not having an impact on the landscape. So I think this is definitely a conversation that's starting to change. And I think a lot of that has been messaging and making sure that not just, you know, private funders, but you know, at a national level where that federal funding is coming in, those kind of really important maintenance pieces are identified. And we've seen that a little bit with some of the great legislation that's passed with some of the infrastructure bills and the other trail backlog dedicated funding that has come through. So I think this is something that's changing, and definitely shout out to all of the incredible volunteers in our region that really take on the lion's share of some of this work that happens to make sure that the hundreds of thousands of users that are in the Tahoe Basin have the opportunity to use these really incredible trails.
Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, and even just to underscore, I think that's one element. The whole purpose of the Environmental Improvement Program is bringing together 80 different partners from around the basin to work together to restore Tahoe's environmental and community health. And this is one piece of that that really showcases how everyone is working together to try to create a better future for the Tahoe trails. So thank you. Next question is, does this plan connect to the transportation plan for Lake Tahoe and other areas?
I can answer that. Yes, that's a great question. And so one of the main reasons that TRPA was involved in this plan is our connection with the transportation plan for the Lake Tahoe region. So TRPA is a metropolitan planning organization for Lake Tahoe, and we are in charge of updating the regional transportation plan for the region every 4 years. And so because of that background and our expertise in transportation planning, we brought some of that knowledge into this plan to ensure that every project that's proposed in this strategy will interface with the regional transportation plan. And then we also evaluated each of the projects against our connectivity goals, and that included connectivity to the existing urban network. So we looked at whether or not transit serves a specific area or trailhead before recommending that a new trail be built in a specific location. And we tried to prioritize trails in locations where there is existing transit infrastructure or existing bike infrastructure, so that connectivity is better and more seamless throughout the region.
Great, thanks, Kira. Just a note, it is 6:23 and we will respect everyone's time and be sure to wrap up by 6:30. We do have some more questions in here. Again, if it's specific to a project, a particular project, please email Tahoe Trails Plan at trpa.gov. We want to make sure that we're being able to respond to these projects overall through the vision of this trail strategy. Let's see here. There was a question about wildfire and wildlife protection. Can someone speak to some of the environmental protections that are going to be in place or that are outlined through this trail strategy in regards to the trails?
I can provide some general information on that. So at this stage, at the strategy stage, we are not at the level of looking at individual species. Once these projects move to the next phase, which would be some sort of environmental assessment, environmental review with the associated public comment periods, that's when we would really get into tightening up the alignments of the proposal, actually looking at the habitats, the soil types, the hydrology of the areas that we're proposing actions. And that's not done in a vacuum. For the Forest Service, that's done using a team of specialists, hydrologists, wildlife biologists, fire ecologists. So it's not just me as a trails engineer answering those questions, it's resource specialists answering those questions. And the answers to those questions are published in the resulting document. So that might be an environmental assessment, that might be an environmental impact statement. So that's really where that deep dive happens. Regarding the fire question, I forget how it was phrased in the chat, but fire is an interesting element on the landscape. We often, when we start laying out trails, we think we might have a pretty good layout, and then someone will make a comment that, oh yeah, these two turns in this trail are pretty far apart. I think this is good, but if a fire ever comes through here, there won't be any vegetation, then there won't be far enough apart. So I say that just to demonstrate that fire changes a landscape. We do sometimes plan trails in locations that might have a dual purpose of serving as a control line, either for a prescribed fire or for wildfire. That does sometimes happen. So I just say that to offer, we're not so focused on the trail as a linear feature. We're trying to focus on a bigger picture and how that trail fits in the landscape.
Good question, and certainly very relevant in our era. So thank you for that one. There was a question just generally about how the questions will be used. Will they be publicly available? And the answer to that is yes. We will plan to post a summary of some of the questions that we've received and some of the answers that we've provided. It might not be verbatim, but we'll do a summary of everything that we've received here. There's also some questions just about what environmental review is required for different trails. I know that might be different depending on where it's located, but is there anyone who might be willing to take a stab at explaining a little bit about how the environmental review process would go for different types of trails?
I want to see if anybody else was interested in weighing in on that subject. So I'll start. If any of the other panel members want to jump in, please do so. But generally, for any trail in the basin where we're proposing new construction, we're going to conduct an environmental analysis. Most locations in the US can get by with a much lower level of environmental review, but we choose to do a higher level here for two reasons. One, we have various species, plants, animals, wildlife, aquatics that are of concern to many people here. And also because we want to have a public process that is part of the environmental review, and some of those lower levels of environmental analysis do not enable us to capture those public comments in the work that we do. So we've been doing environmental analysis level review after the first 2 or 3 years since I've been here. So for about the last 10, 11 years, we've been doing EAs just because it's a more robust and thorough process. There are some larger efforts underway that are led for different fuels projects that are a higher level analysis, like an environmental impact analysis. And those sometimes include trails, but not very frequently. Usually if there's a project that they're proposing for fuels that's going to impact a trail, they may include some work in there, but usually that level of analysis is not required for the native surface trails we're doing around the basin. The class 1 type bike trails that the different agencies build sometimes are conducted through an EIS. Anybody else want to add to that?
All right, you said it all. Thanks, Mike. Well, we are down to our last minute, so I just wanted to once again thank you all for sharing a Tuesday afternoon/evening with us here to learn about the Tahoe Regional Trails Strategy. Again, you can find a lot more information and dive in depth into some of the proposed projects at tahoetrailsplan.org. And the deadline to submit feedback is March 31st. So you can do that by emailing tahoetrailsplan@trpa.gov. So thank you all for joining. We will be sure to post the recording and the slides and a summary of questions and answers to our website in the next few days. So keep an eye on that one. And I hope that you all have an excellent rest of your evening and your week. Take care.